You wake up tomorrow morning, you get out of bed, you walk to the kitchen, and somewhere underneath your skin, in a network of vessels most people cannot even name, a fluid called lymph is sitting almost completely still, waiting for you to move. Your heart has a pump. It beats on its own. It does not need your permission. Your lymphatic system has no such pump. It has never had one, and it never will, which means right now, in this exact moment, the fluid carrying your immune cells and clearing your cellular waste is depending entirely on what you do with your body in the next few minutes. There is one specific movement that activates almost every lymphatic vessel in your body at the same time, and by the end of this video you are going to understand exactly why that movement works, and why almost nothing else comes close. Before I go further, if this kind of body mechanics content is something you want more of, Smart Psychology puts out videos like this regularly, so consider following along so you do not miss the next one. And now let us get into the actual biology. Let me start with something most people were never taught in school, and it is honestly a little bit strange once you sit with it. Your circulatory system has a dedicated pump, your heart, 4 chambers, electrical signaling, contracting roughly 70 to 80 times a minute, moving about 5 liters of blood through your body every 60 seconds, without you ever thinking about it. Your lymphatic system carries a comparable volume of fluid, somewhere around 2 to 3 liters a day, for the interstitial fluid that gets reabsorbed, and it has absolutely nothing like that pump. No chamber, no electrical node, no independent muscle dedicated to pushing it forward. Instead, lymph moves through a passive combination of 3 things: the contraction of your skeletal muscles, pressing against the lymphatic vessels as you move, the natural pressure changes created by your breathing, particularly the diaphragm dropping and rising, and a network of one-way valves inside the vessels themselves that only allow the fluid to travel in one direction, back toward your chest, where it eventually drains into your bloodstream near your collarbones. If you stop moving for long enough, that fluid stops moving too. It pools, it stagnates, and this is why people who sit at a desk for 10 hours a day, or stand still for long shifts, often notice puffiness in their ankles, heaviness in their legs, or a general sense of sluggishness by the end of the day. That is not random, that is lymphatic stagnation, and it is one of the most under-discussed consequences of modern sedentary life. Now here is where most fitness advice quietly fails your lymphatic system without anyone realizing it. Walking is good for you, running is good for you, but both of them are fundamentally vertical impact movements that repeat the same pattern over and over in the lower body. Your calves get squeezed, your thighs get squeezed, the lymphatic vessels in your legs get a reasonable workout, but the vessels in your arms, your chest wall, your abdomen, your neck, and your upper back are barely touched by the rhythm of a jog or a walk. Weightlifting is excellent for muscle and bone, but it tends to isolate specific regions in specific directions. So a bicep curl moves lymph in the upper arm, but does very little for the lymphatic drainage sitting in your lower legs. What almost nobody talks about is a movement that creates a uniform force through your entire body at once, from your feet all the way to the top of your head, in a single repeated motion. And that movement is rebounding, which is the technical term for bouncing rhythmically on a small elastic surface, most commonly a mini trampoline. Here is why rebounding is different from almost every other form of exercise on a purely mechanical level. When you bounce, your body experiences a brief moment of acceleration on the way down, a moment of deceleration as the trampoline surface absorbs your weight and springs back, and then acceleration again on the way up. This creates a rhythmic change in gravitational load on your body, sometimes described in terms of G-force, where at the bottom of the bounce, your tissues briefly experience more than your normal body weight pressing down, and at the top of the bounce, for a fraction of a second, you experience something close to weightlessness. This oscillation between more force and less force happens through your entire vertical axis at the same time. Your feet, your calves, your thighs, your abdomen, your chest, your shoulders, and your neck are all subjected to the same rhythmic compression and release, over and over, dozens of times a minute. Because the lymphatic valves respond to pressure changes, this vertical oscillation opens and closes valves throughout your whole body simultaneously, rather than isolating the effect to one limb or one muscle group the way walking or lifting does. You may have heard a claim, often repeated online, that NASA research found rebounding to be over 60% more efficient than running for cardiovascular benefit. That specific number gets passed around constantly, and I want to be straightforward with you rather than just repeating it, because the original 1980 study by researchers including Jack Greenleaf actually measured something narrower: oxygen consumption and acceleration forces during rebounding compared to treadmill running, and it did find that rebounding produced meaningful physiological load relative to the effort involved, but the specific efficiency percentage that gets quoted in most videos and articles is a simplified and often exaggerated version of the original findings. I am telling you this because I think understanding the real research makes the case for rebounding stronger, not weaker, because you do not need an inflated statistic to see why the mechanism itself makes sense. The vertical, whole body, rhythmic compression is simply doing something that walking, running, and lifting are not built to do. Before we go further into the mechanism, it helps to understand where all of this fluid is actually going, because your lymphatic system is not one continuous loop the way your blood circulation is. It is closer to a drainage network that funnels toward two specific return points. Lymph from your legs, your abdomen, and the left side of your upper body eventually collects in a structure called the cisterna chyli, sitting near your lower spine, which feeds into a long vessel called the thoracic duct, running up along the inside of your chest, and finally emptying into the bloodstream near the left collarbone. Lymph from the right arm and the right side of your head and chest drains through a separate shorter vessel called the right lymphatic duct, emptying near the right collarbone. Every drop of lymph in your entire body, whether it started in your ankle or the tip of your finger, has to travel through one of these two doorways before it becomes blood plasma again, and every bit of that travel depends on the same passive forces we already talked about: muscle contraction, breathing, and rhythmic external pressure, which is exactly why a movement capable of generating pressure through your whole vertical axis at once has such an outsized effect compared to movements that only work one region of the body. Let me walk you through what is physically happening inside your lymphatic vessels when this compression occurs, because the detail here is genuinely elegant. Your lymphatic vessels are lined with tiny cup-shaped valves spaced at intervals along the vessel, and the segment of vessel between two valves is called a lymphangium. Each lymphangium has a thin layer of smooth muscle around it, and this muscle contracts rhythmically on its own, somewhere around 10 to 15 times a minute at rest, in a wave-like pattern that pushes fluid forward while the valves snap shut behind it to prevent backflow. This intrinsic contraction is real, and it happens even when you are lying still, but it is relatively weak on its own. What external movement does, and what rebounding does especially well, is add a second layer of mechanical pressure on top of that intrinsic contraction, compressing the lymphangiums from the outside with every bounce, which dramatically increases the volume of fluid being pushed through the system per minute. Research on lymphatic physiology, including work published by physiologists studying lymphangian contractility, has shown that external compressive forces can multiply lymph flow several times over compared to a resting state, and a rhythmic, whole-body compression like rebounding is about as broad and evenly distributed as an external force can get without surgery or a full-body massage device. If you are finding this useful so far, this is exactly the kind of practical body science smart psychology tries to bring you. So if you have not already, tapping follow means you will catch the next breakdown like this one. And now let me get into why this actually matters for your health, not just your mechanics. Your lymphatic system is not simply a drainage pipe, it is one of the central highways of your immune system. Roughly 70% of your immune cells live in lymphoid tissue, and your lymph nodes, those small bean-shaped structures in your neck, armpits, and groin, act as filtration and surveillance stations where lymph fluid gets screened for bacteria, viruses, and abnormal cells before it re-enters your bloodstream. When lymph flow is sluggish, that surveillance slows down. Waste products and metabolic byproducts sit in your tissues longer than they should, and inflammatory signaling can increase locally, which some researchers studying chronic low-grade inflammation believe contributes to the persistent puffiness, joint stiffness, and fatigue that a lot of sedentary adults describe without ever connecting it back to lymphatic stagnation. On the other end of that spectrum, regularly moving your body in a way that mechanically drives lymph flow supports faster clearance of cellular debris, more efficient immune surveillance, and in people recovering from illness or surgery, Lymphatic movement is often specifically prescribed by physical therapists for exactly this reason, because a body that moves lymph efficiently tends to recover and regulate itself more effectively than one that does not. It is worth comparing rebounding honestly against the other habits people commonly reach for when they hear the word lymphatic, because some of them hold up and some of them really do not. Dry skin brushing, where you brush your skin in long strokes before a shower, is often marketed as a lymphatic detox tool, and while the sensation of brushing can feel stimulating, there is very little controlled research showing that surface skin brushing meaningfully increases lymph flow deeper in the tissue, since the lymphatic vessels that matter most for whole body drainage sit below the layer that a brush can actually reach. Swimming, on the other hand, genuinely does support lymphatic flow, partly through rhythmic muscle contraction, and partly through the external hydrostatic pressure of the water, pressing evenly against your entire body, which is one of the few other activities that comes close to the whole body compression effect of rebounding, though it requires a pool and is harder to do daily for most people. Yoga inversions, where you elevate your legs or your whole body above your heart, can support lymphatic return in the lower body by using gravity to assist drainage toward your chest, and this is a legitimate mechanism, but it tends to help one region at a time, rather than creating the simultaneous whole-body pumping action that rhythmic vertical bouncing produces. None of this is to say those other habits are worthless. It is to say that when you compare the actual physiology, rebounding earns its reputation honestly, rather than through marketing alone. There is also a piece of this that connects directly back to your brain, and I think it is one of the more remarkable discoveries in the last decade of anatomy. In 2015, researchers at the University of Virginia, led by Antoine Louveau, working in the lab of Jonathan Kipnis, identified a network of lymphatic vessels running along the meninges, the membranes surrounding your brain, something anatomy textbooks for essentially the entire history of modern medicine. This meningeal lymphatic system appears to play a role in clearing waste products from brain tissue, including some of the proteins associated with neurodegenerative conditions. And while the research connecting whole-body lymphatic movement directly to brain clearance is still developing, the discovery itself reframes how seriously we should be taking lymphatic health in general, because this system reaches further into your body, including your skull, than most people were ever taught. Before we get to the actual routine, there are a handful of everyday habits that quietly work against your lymphatic system without most people ever noticing, and it is worth naming them plainly. Tight clothing, particularly waistbands, bra bands, and socks that leave a visible indentation on your skin at the end of the day, can compress superficial lymphatic vessels right where they are most vulnerable, restricting flow in exactly the regions that already tend to swell from sitting. Chronic dehydration thickens the composition of lymph itself, since lymph is largely water drawn from your bloodstream, and a more viscous fluid moves more slowly through vessels that already rely entirely on passive pressure rather than an active pump, which means the water advice that applies to your stomach in the morning applies just as directly to your lymphatic system all day long. High sodium intake pulls additional fluid into your tissues through basic osmotic pressure, which is part of why a salty meal is so often followed by visible puffiness in the fingers or under the eyes the next morning. And regular alcohol intake dehydrates tissue while also placing extra metabolic burden on your liver, which sits directly in the path of a significant portion of your lymphatic drainage. None of these habits are catastrophic in isolation, but stacked together on top of a sedentary day, they create exactly the kind of stagnant internal environment that a few minutes of rhythmic full body movement is specifically designed to counteract. There is a clinical side to all of this as well, that most casual fitness content never mentions. In people diagnosed with lymphedema, a condition where lymphatic drainage is impaired, often following cancer treatment or lymph node removal, physical therapists commonly use a technique called manual lymphatic drainage, a very light, rhythmic form of massage designed to mechanically encourage fluid movement toward functioning drainage pathways, often combined with compression garments that apply steady, gentle external pressure throughout the day. The principle behind both of those clinical tools, gentle rhythmic pressure and steady external compression, is mechanically the same principle at work when you bounce on a trampoline, just applied through movement rather than through the hands of a therapist or a garment. This is part of why some physical therapists have started incorporating very gentle, seated or supported bouncing motions into rehabilitation programs for patients who are cleared for it, because the underlying mechanism, pressure changes opening and closing lymphatic valves, does not require you to be a professional athlete to benefit from it. It simply requires consistent, appropriately gentle repetition. Now let me actually walk you through how to do this properly, because rebounding is simple, but there is a right way and a wrong way to approach it if your goal is lymphatic flow specifically rather than athletic performance. You do not need to jump high, and honestly, jumping high works against you here, because the goal is rhythmic, repeated, gentle compression, not maximum height or impact. A small bounce, where your feet barely leave the trampoline surface, sometimes called a health bounce, is enough to create the acceleration and deceleration pattern your lymphatic valves respond to, and it is far easier on your joints over a long session. 10 to 20 minutes a day is a reasonable target for most healthy adults, and you can build up to that gradually if you are starting from nothing. Breathing matters here too, because your diaphragm is itself a lymphatic pump, and taking slower, deeper breaths while you bounce adds a second independent pressure wave working alongside the vertical compression, essentially doubling up the mechanisms moving fluid through your chest and abdomen. If you do not have access to a trampoline, you are not out of options. Calf raises done slowly and repeatedly, ankle circles, and even standing marches where you lift your knees and let your arms swing can meaningfully support lymphatic flow in the meantime. But none of them replicate the whole body, simultaneous compression that rebounding provides, which is exactly why it earns the description of being the one movement that pumps essentially every lymphatic vessel at once. A simple mini trampoline, sometimes sold specifically as a rebounder, is inexpensive relative to most home fitness equipment, takes up a small footprint that fits in a corner of almost any room, and does not require the coordination or space that many other cardio equipment options demand, which is part of why it has quietly remained a favorite among physical therapists and older adults who need joint-friendly movement without sacrificing the mechanical benefit of a rhythmic full-body workout. Timing and progression matter more than people expect. Doing your rebounding session in the morning, after your glass of water and before your first meal, tends to work well for a lot of people, partly because it counteracts the overnight stagnation that comes from 8 hours of lying still, and partly because it is simply easier to build a consistent habit around a fixed point in your day, rather than trying to fit it in whenever you happen to remember. If mornings genuinely do not work for you, a short session in the early evening, after a long day of sitting or standing, can serve almost the same purpose, using movement to clear a full day of accumulated stagnation before you wind down for the night. Start with 5 minutes if you are new to this, focusing entirely on a small, controlled health bounce with your feet barely leaving the surface, and add a minute or two every few days as it starts to feel easy rather than effortful. A brief warm-up, 30 seconds of gentle marching in place before you get on the trampoline, helps your joints and your nervous system adjust to the rhythm before you add the elastic surface into the equation, and a short cool down of slow, deep breathing after you step off gives your diaphragm a chance to keep contributing to lymphatic flow, even after the bouncing itself has stopped. It is also worth being sensible about who should be cautious with this. People with significant joint issues, recent surgery, severe osteoporosis, inner ear or balance conditions, or uncontrolled cardiovascular issues should talk to a doctor before starting a rebounding routine, and pregnant individuals should get specific guidance rather than assuming general advice applies to them. This is not meant as a replacement for medical care in situations that need it. It is meant as a genuinely underused tool for the vast majority of people whose lymphatic system is simply sitting idle because nothing in their day asks it to move. I want to close with something that I think reframes how you look at movement altogether. We tend to think of exercise purely in terms of calories, muscle, and heart rate, and all of that matters, but underneath all of it, there is a second circulatory system in your body with no pump of its own, entirely dependent on you to keep it moving, carrying immune cells, clearing waste, and touching nearly every organ you have, including, as we now know, your brain. Every single day you get to decide whether that system stays active or sits still. And the remarkable part is that the decision does not require a gym membership or an hour of your time. It requires a few minutes of rhythmic bouncing that most people have never once considered as anything more than something children do at a birthday party. If this changed how you think about your own body, smart psychology has more of this kind of biology broken down in exactly this way. So stick around, follow if you have not, and the next time you catch yourself sitting still for hours without realizing it, remember that somewhere underneath your skin, there is a fluid waiting for you to give it a reason to move.